I'm Daniel Kellogg, president of Young Concert Artists, and we are continuing our interview series. We are now expanding it to include alumni of Young Concert Artists. And today we are so delighted to invite Nokuthula Ngwenyama, violist and composer, and Daniel Bernard Roumain, composer and violinist, as guests. And Tula, you were on the roster starting, I think, in the mid-90s. Is that right?
Yes, Daniel. And first of all, it's great to be here and lovely to join the conversation with you and with Daniel Bernard Roumain. Yes, I was on the roster from 1994 to 1998.
And
And
well, I was going to say, before we started, I was getting some help with the pronunciation because I have a hard time with names. Could you tell me how your name is pronounced? And you told me you were going to tell me what it means.
oh yes, my name is Nokuthula Ngwenyama, and it means Mother of Peace, which is the first name, and Ngwenyama means lion.
All right, well, thank you.
So you get to have that balance.
Well, that's great. So you both are performers and composers. And I'm curious if you came to composition first or performance first. And I guess I'll start with you, Tula, and then I'll go to Daniel.
Well, I think I came to both at the same time. I actually started musical studies with the Yamaha program at age 4. And so that program starts with singing, playing the piano, but also composing. They show you note reading, and then I got a magnet kit that had a grand staff in it and some notes. And so from the earliest classes, I was moving notes around and I enjoyed doing it. So I think it's a really great method to get into music, and I think it opened up a lot of different possibilities at the get-go. So it was a very open way of coming into it. But then later I focused more on my instruments. And then through high school, as I did my theory training at the Crossroads School in Los Angeles, my theory teacher, Marianne Cummins, actually would grade my homework and she would say, Tula, you're a composer. But I wasn't thinking that much about it. I would write things on the side and it was really just for me. I would get ideas, I would hear stuff, I would do my assignments, but I didn't really think about being a professional composer because I was so busy practicing to become the best violist I could be, the best and later best violinist I could be, and best string player I could be. So I don't know how to answer that question, I guess. Did it come, I guess the evolution came together, but I didn't realize it was coming together until I got a call from the Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church in Phoenix asking me to write a processional for their bishop, Bishop Thomas, who has since passed, for his 35th anniversary with the church. And so I picked up the phone. They asked if I would do it. I said yes, and I hung up the phone, and I thought, I guess I'm a composer now.
That's fantastic.
So that's kind of how it happened.
It's an unfortunate thing that classical music tries to put people in one box and say that you have to do one thing. So they're focusing on the strings for so long. But one thing that you said about your early training is that the idea that music has to be a certain way or written down or it's handed to us a certain way is, I think, an unfortunate part of how so many people come to classical music. And it sounds like at your earliest age, there was an invitation to play with notes, to make notes your own in whatever way that meant. That's
yes,
great.
Absolutely. I was very fortunate.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And Daniel, how did you come to both composition and performance?
Well, it was Broward County. It was 1970s. Every school had an orchestra in it. I started playing in kindergarten, and I was 10 years old. I started composing, in part because I was also in bands. I mean, we started forming these little rock bands, and I don't know what you call it, jazz band, funk bands, I guess. Nobody knew I played the violin, but we would all show up, wanted to play drums. I was, drum kit, keyboards, guitar. If the drum kit player didn't show up, you played drums. Next day, bass player got grounded, you played bass. And there was always one person who would tell everybody else what to do. So that was my earliest composition. And I would say to the, bass player, here, do this, doom, 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 doom. And then keyboard, oh yeah, do that, do that. You're just figuring it out. Or we would all know a song. We'd play a song together. But no formality to it. And then I was playing, violin, not telling anybody. And then when I got to middle school, Mrs. Griffith, she was so great. She's like, she kind of knew what I was doing and precocious and all this stuff. She said, look, if you write something for our group, I'll play it. I was like, what? And, I was reading. Yeah. I was reading music, but I had never really composed it. So I figured it out. I had no lessons. I looked at something and I looked at my part. I looked at scores. Didn't really have scores. But I knew, because of the band experience, I knew what I wanted the violas, like I knew what I wanted each part to do, even though I had no idea how to really write for it. I was making up key signatures.
That's
by the way,
awesome. I want to see those scores.
I know, they're somewhere. Them. I mean, these are
Nice.
dozens. And, some were 30 seconds long. One was like, it was epic. It was like, 15 minutes long, all written by hand, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And, she, to her credit, she played it. And then she let me conduct, too, which was really great. But again, just figuring it out, like totally intuitive. That was her way. It was great. I got to find her. She really, that trust. Because then she got to the point where she would warm us up. It was about 3 or 4 times a week. And she'd say, okay, Danny, what do you want to do? And then it turned into, she would literally give me the baton and sit kind of over there by her desk. But here's what's cool. She wasn't reading the newspaper, because, teachers would do that sometimes. She was there, but very present.
She was giving you that leadership
100%.
Experience.
Yep. 100%. That
And encouragement.
100%. That sent me on my way.
I was going to say,
actually, if it wasn't for her, I was just going to say, if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have become a composer, actually.
Well, but that's, I think we're not going to come out of where we are without acknowledging and celebrating our educators and encouraging them to continue with as much truth and heart and soul as they can for the next generation, because we were encouraged, and that's what we have to keep doing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask
and it's also trust.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, please. I don't want to keep talking. Go ahead.
No,
Daniel. Sorry, man.
You both inspired me to ask if you had sort of fireworks going off in your mind the first time that you'd written a piece down and shared it with lots of other people to play and had them sort of bring it to life.
Yes.
The fireworks?
But was there an electricity of, wow, this is amazing that I've written these notes, I've handed it to these people, and now they're bringing it to life. My ideas are in their hands.
It's a beautiful experience to be able to share like that, and to really, hopefully, gain the musicians' trust by what we've written down, so that they can feel confident to play it. That's actually one of the big challenges that I face writing, because having read and learned many different scores, I know how hard it is to have to learn a part. And so I don't actually like to write things that are that hard. because because I'm trying to find a way to communicate in a simple way so that we can all kind of play it and play it easily, or rather easily. So in that sense, I think scoring, I'm sorry, I kind of lost what we were talking about in terms of scoring.
Well, I was asking about the sort of excitement early on of sharing your music and having other players bring it to light. And you were talking about the burden of just giving them something that you thought was worthy, I think, of their skills and wasn't overly taxing. I don't know the way to say it.
Yeah, something worthy, but not overly taxing, so that when they come together to play it, or when we come together and play it, that it wasn't such an arduous journey for us to get there. I want us to be able to celebrate and make the music together, and for it to be joyful and meaningful in that way. So yes, when we do come together and we play it, it is, I guess, that fireworks that you were describing.
Well, in particular, I was thinking about, you were talking about mentors getting young people started. And most composers have that early experience when somebody invites them to create something. Somebody says to them, you're important enough to actually create something that we'll all spend time with. And I think that's what I was hearing in the story from Daniel. And I was just excited about hearing that from both of you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes both ways, though. I mean, I feel like for every Mrs. Griffiths and Mr. Miller, who was my first music teacher, I mean, these are the big musical mentors of my life, along with Dr. Pinkston. Dr. Pinkston, African-American man, who at one point was in charge of all of the music for Broward County Public School System. I mean, those three people, musically, in terms of my music education, loom large to this day. But for every one of those teachers, there were 2 or 3 or 4 who were detrimental, terrorizing. You know, the names are important, right? Dr. Charles Noble, terrible, terrible teacher. Shouldn't be teaching at all. I don't know if he still is. If he's hearing this, stop. You know, can't think of some of the other names, but, you know, these are not good people. Let's just start there. They're not. And they're not good people because they are not viewing anybody in front of them as equal. We can get in the race. But I think that's, you know, it's a setup. Classical music is set up to think about not an equal exchange of ideas. It's not synergetic. It's not even bilateral. So tradition becomes someone else's tradition, and everything in there becomes somebody else's tradition and their culture and what they hold most important. So if you think about it, it's really arbitrary, right? A conductor's role can and should be reimagined. But what happens, for example, for me, this was her name. After Miss Griffiths left, Mrs. Black came in. That was her name. She was a young white woman. This was her first teaching job. And all the things that she was taught, and I think all the things that she held dear, had nothing to do with any of us in the classroom. It was a hostile place. And all my creativity, all the things that I mentioned about writing and Miss Griffiths and sitting over there and I'm conducting, she would have none of it. So then it became a fight, a real fight. And there were several moments in the classroom. Well, sure, I'm a kid and I have a lot of big ideas, and she's an adult, she's the teacher, and she doesn't have any ideas other than what she thinks a music room is supposed to be. And it's the worst kind of tyranny. I'm the conductor, I'm the teacher. What did Laura Ingraham say the other day? Shut up and dribble, right?
Oh.
About LeBron James, right? And Drew Brees. Well, just a little bit of story there. You had 2 athletes who were talking about politics, particularly how they view the national flag. And in one case, Laura Ingraham, the Fox News correspondent, in response to LeBron James, said, well, he should just shut up and dribble. I'm telling you, there's a lot of young people right now in music rooms or classroom air who are being basically told, shut up and play, right? That's the decorum. Don't say anything, play. It's wrong, man. We'll get into it, but this is the time of reconstruction and inquiry and interrogation. We should interrogate the things that we hold most dear in classical music, because a lot of those things, they're not just inequitable, they're unsustainable, and they're wrong.
Should we get into it now?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
But you know, Daniel Roumain, I'm so troubled and saddened by the fact that you had those bad classroom experiences, and I'm also saddened by the fact that children everywhere are having these kinds of experiences. And when race plays a part in that, I'm saddened further still. I think when we talk about how race plays a part in these situations, I mean, part of it is just a dichotomy, but part of it is also the actual culture that it's in. Growing up in Los Angeles, I actually was fortunate enough to grow up in a very diverse environment, and I was adopted into a white family But I maintained relations with my father, so, and with the community. And so I was fortunate there. I had a harder time actually getting into music because I wanted to play violin and I was steered towards the piano. I think more for ear training and note reading than anything else. But my first violin teacher, who was Japanese American, after I was struggling with Minuet number 2 in Suzuki Book 1 for a couple weeks, I couldn't get those string crossings because it's hard to play the violin. And so I came in and I played the lesson, and I was a serious student. I knew this was what I wanted to do. I knew that I needed to be a musician, that I was a musician. And she just said, well, if she doesn't have it by now, she will never play. She'll never be a violinist. That is what my teacher said to me, to my mom, my adoptive mother, who was taking me to lessons. And to my mom's dear credit, she said, pack up, we're leaving. And I didn't even have a chance to feel badly. I didn't have a chance. I was just shocked. I went, I packed up the instrument, we walked out, and she said, you're never studying with that person again. That person doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't see. She doesn't see what I see. And she found me another teacher, Bonnie Bell, who's still teaching in Redlands, bless her heart, and she took me in, and she promised me that if I did everything she told me to do, that I would be able to play the violin. And that's how I went to my first real teacher. But just from the get-go, number 1 teacher told me I couldn't do it because I couldn't play Minuet number 2. And I don't even want to name the name because I'm so ashamed. Yeah. And I don't want to bring her shame.
That's cool. That's fair. Yeah. You know, every musician I know has a story of being made to feel, trauma. Every musician I know has their story of trauma. Every musician of color I know has their story of trauma and racism. Every single one, without exception. So there you go.
Since it's come up, can you talk to me about that? Tell me what it's like to be a Black musician coming up in a classical music world.
For me, horrible. In a word, horrible. Yeah. In another word, a fight.
Is that why you weren't telling anyone you played the violin, because it was kind of like something you had to hide?
Oh God, 1970, Broward County, Black boys did not play the violin. No way. There were no models. You know, you get beat up if you were a Black boy, 1970s in Broward County, carrying a violin case. I kid you not. I gave a kid, Ben was his name. I remember his name. I gave him $0.25 every day to carry my violin from when we got off the bus into the music room. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm making a joke about it, but it was a very serious thing. And if I didn't have that $0.25, I was terrified. Some days he would just do it for it, you know. But that was the difference. Ben could carry that case; he would suffer no harm. But to be in 6th grade as a Black boy, carrying a violin case, that would get you beat up, 100%.
Did you think about giving it up?
100%. Yes, I did give it up. Okay. I gave it up for a whole year.
And what brought you
tell my parents? Oh, love for the instrument. I mean, I still play it. I play it in my closet. Isn't that funny? But
wow.
Yeah, the love for the instrument brought me back, and just, you know, my own courage, I suppose. But yeah, it was a love for the instrument.
Well, I think that touches so much upon what Anthony McGill was talking about. Yeah. In learning to listen, how we are called to, it's a higher power, it's a higher love, this music. So what we're talking about, what unites us all together as artists, is that we're striving towards making this beautiful music together. It's greater than all of us. So
yeah.
So that is the undercurrent of everything we're talking about.
Yeah. I think orchestras, just because I think if I'm understanding your audience, it's both probably a mix of solo, chamber, and orchestral.
That's right.
And if they're young musicians, they're probably most of them, the majority, are having to be in some sort of youth orchestra program. Okay, great. So here's what I want to go back to, right? Because we're going back to something.
Okay.
Let's make it not about going back to those traditions that we've all been through, right? And it's all kind of, it's one task. The one task is we got to play this concert, and we got to play this concert well. Forget about the music. That's where we're geared. Let's make it about different tasks, different projects. See, that's much more interesting. What if the task was, we're going to learn something together as a group? Forgetting about concerts, let's make that a task. Wow, now that's exciting to me. What piece? I'm speaking now to your music educators, right? I can do this in 2 minutes. Okay, day one. I'm not even your conductor. Let's find a new word. See, that's a task. You got 80 people in the room. We're not going to use the word conductor. What's another word? Okay, we're not going to use the word rehearsal. What's another word? Great. And we're not going to focus on the concert. We're going to focus on the next 2 weeks. Great. What do you want to do? Already, you've changed. You've made a bit. You could tell, even in our conversation, wow, I've never been in an orchestra rehearsal like that. Okay? So let's talk about what we would do over the next 2 weeks. Okay, what's everybody listening to? What's everybody listening to? I don't know who the cool people are. I'm going to pull one out of my head. Drake. Okay, great. Name a song by Drake. I can't name one, but it's a cool song by Drake. Okay, great. You guys are going to learn it. You guys are going to perform it as an orchestra, okay? I'm just going to be here, but you're going to figure it out. You know what's going to happen? First of all, people are going to be like, I don't know what to do. And then that's group mentality, right? That's called a group aesthetic. The group aesthetic of the not knowing what to do. That's called a void of leadership. And guess what happens? It's inevitable. After a few minutes, somebody's going to say and going to take charge. There's going to be a child in there who's going to say, okay, I know what to do. All right, hey guys, let's listen to it together. Great, yeah. Oh, I know this song. Okay, well, we got to do our version of it. And they've all seen American Idol. We got to do our version, not their version, our version. Okay. All right, basses, cellos. Here, you play this note. That's what's going to happen. And maybe even in one rehearsal, that whole orchestra, they're going to figure it out. Maybe 2 rehearsals, they're going to figure. Now, think about that for a second. Wow.
That's empowering.
Exactly. Can you imagine? Now at that point, they're going to feel like they can do anything. Put a piece of music in front of them, bring it on. Mussorgsky, bring it on, whatever. Right? That's what I'm talking about. Let's start to talk about the task. What do you actually want these 50, 60, 70, 80 or people to know? Do you know how many times I've been in a youth orchestra, I can't tell you the person's name? Because nobody's even asked me. We don't even go around the room asking, what's your name? There you go. So let's think about the task at hand, because you see where I'm going. The task for this country is going to be
community task.
That's right.
Local to
That's
right.
right. That's right.
And that's a way, actually, if we think about it, to a peak efficiency.
That's exactly right.
I mean, put all the other commentary aside. I mean, if you just want to have an efficient society, that is the best way to do it.
That's exactly right. You know, my son knows that if he's ever in peril, you got to get into their mind. What's your name? Somebody starts to harm you. That will break someone, right? It's very hard to hurt somebody if you know their name. It's harder. So he knows at 10 years old, if somebody's doing something, okay, wait. What's your name, though? What's your name? My name is Zachary. What's your name?
That's an important, so that goes to the lessons that you're teaching your son.
That's right. That's part of the talk, right? But we could all have a talk. Okay, so in today's parlance, the talk with a capital T refers to how we prepare specifically young men and people of color to survive an encounter with a hostile law enforcement officer. I call that, by the way, a lethal intimacy. It's a lethal intimacy. These are intimate acts, hands on hand, boot on neck. Somebody's going to die, okay? So the talk refers to how do we prepare children of color specifically, or actually any young adult, for a potentially lethal intimate act with a law enforcement officer. So Daniel, for our conversation, Tula, for our conversation, I would be interested in the talk that we might want to have in classical music. I would encourage any music. Right. What's our talk? Sorry, I'm not being clear. What would our talk be? Right. If you're a music teacher, you got to go back and teach 5th grade. What's your talk going to be?
Well,
that's interesting to me.
I think it goes right into programming and educational curriculum right off the bat. And so that we don't have a curriculum that Toyin mentioned in Learning to Listen, that the saraband comes from a West African dance. I didn't even know that. And I've taught music of Africa and the diaspora on the college level. So that's a frightening thing. So we need to be able to have that be common knowledge in our classrooms. So part of the talk means having it being talked about and having the idea that there are no Black elements in classical music and that somehow we're kind of just breaking in, instead of it actually, and this is where I disagree with you, Daniel, there actually is a synergy that's been going on for centuries with Black music and European music and everything in between. And as the world gets more connected, all of our music is becoming more connected and everything is influencing everything else. So in that way, I think that there's much more presence there that needs to be celebrated, and that comes with education so that we know about it so that we can celebrate it.
Sure, I agree with that.
So that is something that we can change tomorrow. I have been trying to listen as much as I can to the things that I haven't listened to, but I also love to listen to the classics, and I turned on some Mozart for my kids to listen to and to inspire them, because he wrote it when he was 15. Yeah. One of his symphonies, and I said, look at these, he could somehow do this. Like, this should inspire all of us to be able to write. But in any case, I'm sorry, I have so many notes here that I'm trying to talk about. Okay. But I believe, going back to the talk in classical music, that we have to celebrate these accomplishments that are there, and the fact that we already are culturally entwined with one another. Like, there already is that connection. So now we also have to, talking about the talk, not only make sure we're teaching the right things, but make sure that our leadership reflects the contributions that we're making.
Yeah, and that we're made. And that we're made.
That we're made and that we're making. And so that has to do with making sure boards, people who control budgets, understand that there is a mandate to diversify right now.
Yeah. I think part of, and you're right, you have to almost kind of qualify it, the classical music talk, or the talk, just to be clear.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
I think it's probably a different conversation. Probably the first one I would think is just a music student having a talk with themselves. What do they want out of their music? Then probably a talk with their parents. I know my son did not like his music class, and when I got into it, I realized, well-meaning teacher, but kind of terrible leader, not very good at inspiration. So I think it begins with the student. It begins with then a conversation with their parents or guardian. Then I think it extends to other students feeling empowered. One student, oftentimes, in general, I think children are empathetic. So if they'll talk with one another, and if a large segment of those students in a music class are not satisfied, they should feel empowered to speak up to their teacher, to certainly speak up to their parents. Mm-hmm. Where it gets exciting to me, of course, is this notion of empowerment in a youth orchestra, right? Yeah. Where you oftentimes have real investment, time, money, you name it. And there should be a sense of, we're not actually wanting to do this. I hope that as we go back to playing in an orchestra, that there isn't tyranny. There isn't, it's kind of a dictatorship. It's not a very democratic idea. Let's change that. And I think young people should know. Look at what's happening in the streets. Do that. Do that in the rehearsal room. You can be polite about it. You have a break, you get together, you say, hey guys, we don't want to do this. We don't like this. This isn't working for us. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of it, I think every music teacher in this country, every youth orchestra director in this country, better not come back to status quo. I call that a moral amnesia. They better not. But I'm telling you one thing. I was just out there. We were talking about this, Daniel and Tula. I just came back from a Black Lives Matter rally in Dover, Massachusetts, of all places. Lily White, Dover, Massachusetts. And there were young and old people out there, mostly young, though. This is a youth-driven movement. And I want to say this is a cautionary tale. If you are a music teacher or a music educator in this country, and your response to everything going on is more Bach and more Beethoven, more of the same, good luck with that. You're in peril. You
Well,
should
the
be.
students are demanding more.
Absolutely.
And I'm hearing that from
100%.
friends and colleagues all over the country who are saying, oh, I need to teach this curriculum, and it's student-led.
Yes.
And they're
100%.
thrilled about it. So I agree.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to come back to Daniel Kellogg's question about what it was like growing up as a person of color in classical music. When I heard orchestras as a child, I wasn't thinking color. I was thinking music, and it moved me. It was stunning and beautiful, and it continues to be stunning and beautiful, and I saw my path in life. So even when my own father said to me, asked me, as I was studying throughout my youth, why are you playing that white man's music? Because he was from the bush, from Barengwa in Zimbabwe. He couldn't understand that. He started to turn, he started to show a little bit of support when I came out and I was concertmaster of the Cal State University Northridge Youth Orchestra with Wes Kenny conducting.
Oh, I know Wes.
So he's now in Fort Collins.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So he was my first orchestral conductor. And being concertmaster in his orchestra was a great honor and something that I worked hard for and I was very proud of. And so and I thought, and I was responsible. And so that is when my father finally said, oh, well, if you can get up and have some sort of leadership, then I can see why you would do it. I'll support you now. He could see that I loved it and that people were responding to what I was doing, to my playing. And so that's probably the only, the family impact. But I was so fortunate to be in a community where I was encouraged. I was surrounded by people who encouraged me. And I have to just thank my family for that.
And it sounds like that is not always the experience, certainly as Daniel was talking about earlier.
It is not, but I was fortunate to have had that.
I want to make sure we get to the piece that we're here to talk about, but I wanted to go back to something, Daniel, you were talking about earlier, playing in a band and then playing in orchestra, and talking about the tyrannical nature of sort of an orchestra and the classical music structure, and how often bands work more in a communal effort, even though there's often leadership, but there's more collaboration.
Exactly right.
In some ways, when you say, what's the talk in classical music? I mean, to me, it goes to a very fundamental question, which is, why do we make music? Why do we want to express things as humans in a musical language? And how does that language manifest in different settings? And at least in a classical setting, understanding how different that is in other settings. And maybe there's ways to capture that different language in the classical setting.
I'm sorry, I want to make sure. I think it's a question.
Well, I was just making an observation. If you have a point to offer back, I mean, we could keep talking about it, but I do want to talk about Tula's Finding the Dream. But I don't know, did you have something you wanted to talk about, how orchestras work versus how a band works?
Sure. I mean, you're there's so much about commercial music. There's so much about other music that classical music could benefit from. So process, even the rehearsal process. Yeah, it's depending on the band, at least in my experience. You have more conversation. Sure, it's less people, but again, there's so much room for so much more to happen in classical music that ultimately would make it more humane.
Hmm.
And, you know, it just requires all of us getting out of the way of our own stigmas and our own routines. Tuning up is an opportunity for equity. It is. The way we sit doesn't have to be that way. You know, it's kind of a myth. You know, as a composer, if I write a piece, I'm going to write a piece. Well, the first thing's going to be because it's going to be in the score and the part, then you have to do it, right? So imagine a part where the first direction says, sit anywhere you want. Hmm. That's the first thing. That's measure one for mine.
I love it. Do it.
Right. Now, let's just, Daniel, I know we're going to get onto the piece, but let's just think about that dream for a second. Because what's going to happen? Okay, let's not talk about the pros because it just already makes my head hurt. But let's talk about, for 1 minute, the myth that all the string players have to sit together. Because that's what's going to happen, right? You're going to have, in the tradition, well, wait, we can't have the flute player sitting where the concertmaster sits. And then it takes somebody like me saying, well, why? Tell me why. What is it about that, right? No, well, you know, the violins, and they're going to talk, right.
I would argue.
Okay.
Having recorded an orchestra, I really appreciate having all the first violins where they're supposed to be under their microphones. The second violins where they're supposed to be. I really don't want this kind of system happening in a recording session. That's all I'm saying.
But not talking about a recording session and talking about and not talking about, by the way, you know, a traditional piece. And I would argue I would apply both. Let's just investigate as a dream.
Okay.
What would happen if you could empower 60, 70 young musicians to sit wherever they want? It's an important point. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cryptic. When black people in this country started sitting in, I'm going to sit here, that inspired change. When Rosa Parks refused to move, that inspired change. And believe it or not, we didn't always used to sit the way we used to do in an orchestra, right? That came about because the instruments changed, the halls changed. That was a technical innovation, and it keeps changing. So there is a tradition of us not always sitting the way we have become accustomed to. But I'm trying to grapple for 1 minute in this notion of, I would want to see what would happen if 60 people, if the tuba player now felt empowered to sit where the first violist would sit. That is interesting to me. Everything else I think we can work out. Because what I would say is, I have a feeling because of parents, because of their own nature, I have a feeling that second oboist, he or she wants to be seen. I think there's going to be a push to the front. I think that young people, I would love to see all the violinists spread out throughout the orchestra. That's so exciting. I'd like to see new combinations of stand partners. Can you imagine?
Well, that, I think, the shuffling stand partners, that should happen all the time in professional orchestras. And I say that, you know, guardedly, because I have not played in a professional orchestra. So, but I think that it would make it dynamic. I imagine that it would make it somehow kind of less of the same when you know that you're going to be rotating around the section and
absolutely,
and getting to play with other people. I think that's variety is important.
Right. But getting to this notion, if you can just imagine, it's hard to because I've never seen it, and I love that already. Imagine an orchestra where no two instruments are the same. It looks like chaos, let's say, right? I shouldn't use that word. It looks like an orchestra where everybody is sitting where they want. There's no real rhyme or reason. Now, what would that sound like? That's interesting to me. Because see, now here's where it gets interesting, right? Let's play Beethoven's Fifth. But now it's a whole different system, a whole different skill set has to happen now. You've got 15 violinists spread out everywhere. By the way, for an audience, that's exciting as hell. It is. I'm sorry. Oh. That's exciting as hell.
Mixing it up, mashing it up like that.
It's exciting as hell. That's right. So that's the second thing. So it's a new skill set. And the third thing here is that, again, forgetting about the concert for a second, in terms of how we exercise, how do musicians exercise their creativity? This would be a great way to do it. It would make every rehearsal something different. It would force us to have to listen differently, move our bodies differently, stay together differently. You know, it takes old rules, but it puts them in a whole new light and a whole new manifest of application.
See, but I can
Right?
see that being applied in a sense of, okay, if we were to just mix up and play a Symphonie Fantastique and put the brass in the front section and the strings in the back, I mean, that might be interesting as an exercise. But I don't know if we would hear very much in the audience. I mean,
Maybe
I
the
think,
brass would have to play softer.
well, even then, even then. So but I think what it would do though is it would allow us to tweak the way we sit, because we might make better music in a position in the orchestra that's completely different than what we even have now. So
Yeah.
I like that it invites that possibility.
Yeah.
I think at the very
That's
least, you're
cool.
advocating that fundamental questions should be asked and that things very, very basic should be revisited. I do need to pivot to make sure that we talk about the piece that Tula is creating and you both are collaborating on, because we will run out of time. But so, Tula, you are creating a piece called Finding the Dream. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. Well, it's based on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and also the recent murders that have been going on with George Floyd, now Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. It's just been an onslaught while we've been in a pandemic. So it really kind of is a time of reckoning for all of us. Martin Luther King is one of my heroes, as he is for many, and I was devastated as a mother, especially with the George Floyd death, um, and just very frustrated, as I feel that many of us, as I know that many of us are. But as artists, because I hope that all of us, all of our policymakers, all of our educators are working as hard as we all can to get through this together. As artists, we also have to work as hard as we can to get through this together and to somehow uplift. I feel like that is my duty. That all of the training and all of the hope and all of the heart and all of the love that I received has to go into this moment where I can create something. So Finding the Dream is that creation. I just was finishing Daniel's part. Do you have a felt guitar pick, by the way?
I do. Several.
Okay, okay, awesome, because I definitely want that sound. So I just finished writing a small solo for Daniel, but you can do whatever you want. These are just suggestions. Like seriously, it's totally free. But and because it's been so difficult to make music with people, I'm inviting my family to fill out the parts. So Sophia, my daughter, will be playing piano. My son Edward will be playing acoustic guitar and singing. I'll do some singing too, because there are words. It's a song, but it's also it's a work. And I'm trying to get it under 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but I'm writing into the first couple ideas, and I'm already like, I'm wondering if I'm going to go over. That's my fear. So it's actually it's becoming a challenge to write what I want to write and to condense it into that time, but to make that time to use it for good. So this is the piece that I'm writing, and that we'll get to premiere together. And I'll send you what I've written so far, and you tell me if you feel I'm going in the right direction, or you want something else, or you don't like it, or whatever.
I'm down. I'm down.
Yes, but it's premiering. It's going to be premiered live June 24th, 7 p.m. PST, which is 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but it will be up for several days. So if you can't tune in live, I hope that people will come and join us, join me, join Daniel, join my family as we all play and talk and discuss and create and dream, find a dream together in 45 minutes or less.
But that was something I was going to ask, because you told me it was 45 minutes. And then I know this one piece you were trying to work within the 8-minute and 46-minute time frame. What are the other components of this piece? You told me there would be some conversation.
Well, of the entire conversation, of we're going to be conversing and playing and discussing for a whole 45 minutes, but I'm hoping to be able to use 8 minutes and 46 seconds for finding the dream.
Okay, got it. And Daniel, you're going to be participating live, but from Massachusetts?
Yes.
So it's unrelated to the topic, but it's a fascinating thing how people are collaborating in this, this Zoom era, this era of remote work.
Well, it's possible. I mean, I think what happens, not just in classical music, but I think in American culture, we get very comfortable with, a system. Mm-hmm. So, systemic change then becomes very difficult, right? Mm. So in music, we're very comfortable doing things together. Suddenly, even though there are so many different options, even this is musical, if we're talking at the same time, right, then we can actually make music at the same time, occupying space in Zoom. You just have to write it differently. It has to be conceived differently. It's as simple as saying, take Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Everyone take out your part. Play the first movement. There's only 3 rules. As softly as you can, as slowly as you can, and you end when you want to. If you said that to any orchestra, it would not only would it be so magical, right? But you could do that in Zoom, right? You could actually do that in Zoom. That could actually be the piece. So I know what happens is we get into these things, everybody's on a click track, and you're working with a videographer, and you're slicing it all together, and it's great, and it's magical. But I'm also interested in the rules that are before us, the ground that's before. The 3 of us could collaborate and create a piece right now. We really could. And even, we can set up, on a technical level, we can set up our Zoom rooms to allow for all of us to make sound at the same time. That's not hard to do.
Even teaching when everybody has a proper microphone, and using audio movers helps a lot too, and bringing down the latency. Sometimes it skips, but I find that the sound quality is better, so you can interact. But I like the fact that I think being maybe outliers in a way, well, for sure you, Daniel, because you come up with these creative ways of thinking around things that I think really do need to be applied to the status quo, and I hope that the status quo is listening and taking some notes.
Yeah, I mean, are things better than they were 20 years ago? Sure. Arguably.
I agree.
In terms of classical music and its appetite and its audiences, sure. Will they be better 20 years from now? Probably. Will classical music ever go away in its entirety? Probably not. Will it kind of limp on the way it is now? Not being an integral part of the big cultural movements. Maybe, we might disagree on this, right? I don't see classical music as integral to our big cultural conversations. I just don't. There's a few stars here and there. But,
I believe that the pen is mightier than the sword. So every time any of us goes and puts something in the score, we know that we're putting truth, and it's there the way we see it.
Right. But let me be clear that we need specific systemic change.
Well, absolutely.
In classical music, right, to make it relevant. So some of the things that I'm talking about have to do with I really do believe that if classical music as an interest, as an industry, and for, you know, to be totally transparent, I serve on many boards, the League of American Orchestras, you know, so on and so forth. We're trying. We're certainly there's goodwill, but to make the big changes that would actually make classical music vital for people, it's going to require one of two things: either a wholesale change in leadership, which has happened. It's happened in other industries. It's happened in just about every other industry, by the way, right? So, what would, in other words, that's you know, what would the world do? What would the world be without, oh man, the man who founded Apple?
Oh,
Steve
Steve Jobs.
Jobs?
What would the world, thank you, be like without Steve Jobs, or say what you want about Microsoft, Bill
Okay.
Gates,
Okay.
right? Right. So you either have real change in leadership, or you have a change in leadership's aesthetic. How do they fundamentally view the industry? If one of these two things don't happen, nothing will really change. So let me put it even more succinctly. And this is where, sorry, Daniel, but I've got to be honest.
Okay.
Peter Gelb, who runs the Met, recently put out a video, and he'll talk about in an accompanying New York Times article where he says he went to the hall and he went with a small crew, and you know, despite the coronavirus, he wanted to speak directly to his audience to announce that there will be nothing happening at the Met until 2021. That's what he said. Now, he also didn't say three words. Three words that, by the way, I don't even need to say right now, because if anybody's hip to it or paying attention, they know exactly what those three words are. Until Peter Gelb and until the Met understands that it's not just about those three words, but it's about systemic change for opera and classical music, and for those little black people, those little black boys and girls who only aspire to greatness, and greatness within classical music. Until someone like Peter Gelb understands that role and responsibility, not only are we at peril, but things won't change. And here where it gets more interesting. What are we going to do about it? George Floyd didn't die alone. He died what we call witness. And it wasn't just the four men on his back. There was somebody filming, and there was almost like a Greek chorus. My God, please. Nobody intervened. I get it. Nobody intervened. That's where we are right now. You are either George Floyd, you are either an officer on his back, or you are either witnessing. And I don't know about you, I know what I want to do. I want to, excuse my language, I don't want to just witness. I want to charge the gates. I want to push those officers aside. I want to take the capacity and the will of my body and say, no, this is not enough. It's not right, and it's not enough. Peter Gelb is fair game, right? And he ain't the only one. And me just saying this right here with you, Daniel Kellogg, that's putting me in peril. That's it.
So then let me be direct. What would you say to arts leaders like myself? I mean, you said something very specific, but what would you say more generally? Or
Tula, I have plenty to say, but Tula.
Well, I think in looking at the system, I think that we need to encourage. I think that it's naive for us to imagine that every Black and brown child in this country has great teachers who encourage them all the time. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine that all children have that, but the system is there, so we have to encourage. So I would say, come up with a special award, come up with a mandate that says we want to encourage our Black and brown players to apply. Make that commitment and partner with other organizations like Sphinx, other organizations that have been doing this, and make the commitment. Make the commitment in what you present and how you present. Make the commitment with the repertoire and the programming for all artists across the board. There are ways that this can be done. But I think it really opens, it starts with opening the mind to being able to do it, and seeing that by doing it, it's not taking away from others.
Mhm.
It's just increasing the field for everybody who loves it and who deserves a chance to shine in it. And it's educating us. I mean, now I think the entire public wants to know more. I was listening to Julia Perry the other day. She's a fabulous composer. And there are so many other great composers I don't know, and that I want to know, from this great canon, from this great community of artists that we're all a part of. And I think that administrators need to see that this community is much broader than they thought. And this is the wake-up call for that. So now let's get out into the community and involve everybody in this. That's what I would, that's what I say. But
Yeah.
there's a way to do it with hope and with positivity, and with everybody on board. I mean, this is a beautiful thing. It's a very respectful thing, and it should be celebratory too.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Tula.
Thank
It's
you.
so on point. It's so on point. I would say to you, Daniel Kellogg, and it's a really great question. Do you have children?
I do. I have a daughter who's 14.
Oof.
Oh,
All right, so that makes it even easier. What I would say to you is, think about you're going to adopt my son. Okay, I've got a son. He's 10. Now he's yours. Okay. Think about your son, my son. Sorry, he's now your son, and you have 2 children. Think about anything you wanting to do as your table, the dinner table.
Mhm.
Okay? Think about the people you want to invite, the alliances, the people you can invite people to the dinner table that Zach's biological dad never could. Think about the food you want on that table, right? Think about the experiences and the conversations you want on that table, right? Think about who you want in your house, right? So think about what the capacity you have for change, and then think about what are the alliances you can build that you can invite to your table, and the food you're going to feed to your daughter and now my son, and that it's going to be the same food. You're going to put it in your mouth. So that makes it not just aspirational, but that actually gives it urgency, right? Tomorrow, your daughter's got to eat. My son's got to eat. And he's going to do all of these things that will make him who he is. And you have a lot of control and impact. So I would say start with, and you have to embrace it, specific systemic change. That means you and your organization and other alliances. Who are the other people that you can talk to who are in your position where you can actually say, wow, we got to change. Number 2, think about who's sitting at the table. Who is talking to you? We're friends, right? Tula is your friend. So think about, again, who's at that table right next to you and your daughter and now your son talking with you. And it should be people who don't just look like you. It should be people who look like my son, right? Number 3, think about all the aspirational messaging that's gone out. That's great. And it's over. Now we got to get to, these are the things that I'm going to do. And number 3, give me a date. Not only are we going to do these things, but we're going to do them by September 1st. And as Tula was saying, we're going to do them for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, forever.
I think that the arts organizations that move swiftly on this are going to be the arts organizations that come out of this sooner, because there is no way that the public is going to come back out for the same old after this.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, okay, people will want to hear a Beethoven symphony. I want to hear a Beethoven symphony, but not just a Beethoven symphony.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that the smaller organizations actually will be more successful than the bigger ones. So if you can stay lean and mean going through it and make those institutional changes quickly, I actually feel really positive about it. So and I'm very excited about it. And also in terms of the artists on the roster now, I think that they are in an amazing position, because here they had their debuts, they're starting their careers, and then all of a sudden everything shuts down. And then on top of this, we have this social an economic reckoning, which I do believe we are going to get through. But it's a forced sabbatical, as Daniel Kellogg was mentioning the other day, for all of us. But for young artists, in a way, what a blessing to have that moment of introspection and to be able to really be true to oneself coming through this, because we've all grown going through these crises. I hope. So when they come out, there's going to be a level of artistry. I am really looking forward to those concerts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, I agree with you. And I think, sorry, I'm just, I love my son so much. And I think the opposite is true. If your daughter became my charge, I would have to really have conversations with white people, presumably you're white. I'd have to know more about her culture and her history. I would have to really understand maybe the trauma she's suffered through, and have an understand of where trauma might be coming. And more importantly, as an artist, I would want to create a whole program, a whole industry that was responsive and reflective to her, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one way to look at it. If my black son became your charge, I guarantee you, just looking at you, and this is the first time I think we've had a conversation like this, I guarantee you, you would know what to do. So just do that and do it for us. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Sorry, I don't know why this got all heavy and deep, y'all. We're talking about music. We're talking about kids.
But you know what's so okay? Go ahead, please. I just find it so interesting because I just find it interesting because I think about when I'm with my children. I've been with my children or with a child actually at the park when they were young. And someone asked me if I was my child's babysitter. And I said, well, I'm her babysitter. Yes, I'm her mother. So, I mean,
yeah, see that?
Something that I've learned though is I can't control the way other people see. I can only be where I am and what I can live, what I see. When I see my child, I see my family, I see my community of people. And so that's what I see. So sometimes I don't talk about it as much with my children. I think they identify with every aspect of their heritage. But I think it's harder for my kids because I think because people don't see them as Black, but I think they feel Black. And I think that's sometimes hard because sometimes they don't understand why other people don't get it. But on the other hand, what I'm hopeful about with their generation is that they're mixed with all of these beautiful influences that they can celebrate. And it shows that the world really does come together if we let it. That's what I see when I see my children. And I like all of us, I mean, I absolutely love them so much. So it's, I really want them to be proud of who they are as people, and to celebrate every aspect of who they are. And I want them to see the world and to see diversity and and through our friendships and connections in the music world and the arts world, they do get to see that. And I'm so thankful, but I want all children to have access to that. That's what I want as a mom. It pains me when children don't have that access, and then they are victims of systemic racism and they don't have opportunities. And that's not right, because we're only as strong as our weakest link. That's something I've been wanting to say for a long time. I mean, obviously I'm not the first person to say it, but that's how I feel right now.
Wow, I do need to wrap us up because we're supposed to take an hour on the Violin Channel's time. Wow,
okay.
We talked about so many amazing things and we didn't get to talk enough about finding the dream. It's June 24th.
Well, I just hope that people will come and people will hear it and will understand that it is my hope that we all step up and do what it is we need to do to get through this stronger together.
Yeah.
So remind me, June 24th, 7 p.m. Pacific time. And where can they find the link to watch it?
ASU Care Cultural Center.
Okay. And we can put that in the comments. And then, Daniel, I know that you have a new work, Requiem for the Living in Color, which is on Facebook right now. We can put a link there. Yep. And that's a brand new collaboration.
Brand new collaboration with the great Steer Films and Carlos Andre Toro, great Providence-based filmmaker. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
And where can people find more about each of your work? What's the best place where they can hear your work, read more about what you're doing?
Yeah, myname.com. So if you're looking at my name right there, danielroumain.com, it's all there.
Okay.
And for me, it's tulamusic.com, THULA music.com, and on SoundCloud if you want to hear the stuff I'm writing. And I may even put up a sneak peek to the first movement of my concerto. So come check it out.
I know there was so much to talk about that I didn't get to play clips. I'm just very, very honored to listen to what you both have to say. And it's an important time to listen. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us to talk and to come back as an alumna. It's really a thrill. And to share this wonderful collaboration with Daniel Bernard Roumain.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Daniel. Thank you, Tula.
Thank you both.